Hey kiddos, today is Thursday, September 2nd. Actually, I'm going to be recording the lesson for Wednesday, September 1st. So I'm going to send you the PowerPoint that I walked through with the class yesterday. And unfortunately, we watched a couple of videos, pretty big chunks of videos to reinforce the lesson that I have no way of sharing with you. So it just reinforces what I talked about. It's just unfortunate you won't be able to watch it because it was kind of entertaining. But anyway, we are talking about the American Revolution. When I finish the video lecture, if you'll go into the daily assignment log, and that's where you will see where you should write your writing prompt, and just follow the instructions in the daily assignment log. So we revisited Saratoga when we ended class on, let me think, when was that? I guess it was Monday. We didn't quite finish the America, the Story of Us. We were watching the march of General John Burgoyne, British General John Burgoyne, from upstate New York through Canada down towards New York City. And the America, the Story of Us video portrayed, thousands of British troops marching through the thick woods of upstate New York with their Indian scouts that were trying to get them to New York, basically. And there was a militia, an American militia group of about 500 sharpshooters, I'll call them that, that were harassing the British Army as they were traveling through the forest. If you recall in the video, it says that the officers were traveling with, I think they said 200 wagons that contained everything from clothes to fine china to silverware. They had their mistresses and their wives and servants that were also traveling with them. So they were pretty bogged down to make that kind of a trek. And so another misfortune that happened for the British Army was that their intention was to meet up with General Howe, who had been occupying New York City. But General Howe actually had decided to try to conquer Philadelphia. So he did not meet up with General Burgoyne, but Burgoyne didn't know that. And so the thought was that they would cut the colonies into two sections, New England and then the southern states south of New York. But that didn't work out that way. So between the militia and the call to arms that went out all over the New England countryside as units came in and started to surround General Burgoyne, it became pretty clear that he was not going to be able to reach New York City. He may not get out of it alive. And there was a two-day battle that took place near Saratoga, New York, in which General Burgoyne had some success, but he kept losing men and kept losing men, and ultimately the American army continued to gather people from around the country, and General Burgoyne, running out of ammunition and losing officers and losing soldiers, decided to surrender. And so he did surrender. I believe there were upwards of 9,000 soldiers that either lost their lives or were taken in as prisoners. And so it was a huge victory for the Americans. So you'll see a picture there of General Burgoyne surrendering. He's in the red, and he's surrendering his sword to a dude in the middle. Sorry, dude. It looks like Washington, but it's not. It's actually General Horatio Gates, who was the American commander. In your reading assignment, which was pages 95 to 102, kind of the middle part of chapter 5, it talks about Horatio Gates and that momentous occasion when he accepts the surrender of General Burgoyne. But later on, it talks about the war turned south, and General Gates, how shall I say, hightailed and ran when his men decided to hightail and run. And so he was ruined. His reputation was ruined because rather than standing and fighting, he ran off with his men in the face of the enemy in a battle in the South. I think it was in South Carolina, might have been North Carolina. And so we were talking in class about the fact that this particular image, this painting of him, is very, very famous. And I was wondering why it was not included in the Capitol Rotunda. And so we were surmising that perhaps it's because of this humiliation that he faced later in the war. That while this was a momentous occasion, actually the turning point of the war, it is not featured like some of the other surrenders. And so, anyway, I don't know for sure, but the next slide, slide number 3, what I did as we were right before we watched another video on Saratoga, one of the drive-through history videos, which I unfortunately don't have access to give you. I tried to find it online and I couldn't find it. I just went through and once again talked about the order of events, kind of the cause and effect of the war. So I'm going to do that with you right now. So in April of 1775, tensions were tight, intense, and the British Army went looking for John Hancock and Sam Adams in Lexington, and went looking for ammunition in Concord, Massachusetts. And that is when we had the battles of Lexington and Concord. That was April of 1775. So blood was shed. Over 300 British soldiers were killed or wounded as farmers from all over the countryside lined the road back to Boston and took aim at them. A month later, the British Navy noticed that the Massachusetts militia were essentially digging into reinforcements up above the harbor, and so they decided to go after them, and they tried shooting cannons at them, couldn't reach them, and so they got out of their boats, charged the hill 3 times, finally took it. Took a lot of casualties, but finally took the hill, and that was the Battle of Bunker Hill outside of Boston, sometimes referred to as Breed's Hill, in June of 1775. So just a couple months after Lexington and Concord. 9 months later, George Washington has been appointed commander of the Continental Army, and he is in charge of the troops that are all surrounding Boston. The militia is not allowing anything to come and go out of Boston and trying to hurt the British Navy that's stationed there. And General Benedict Arnold and Henry Knox have gone to upstate New York and captured a British fort, and confiscated a number of cannons. And they've brought them back to George Washington, who in the course of a night had them set up on the hill, and he sent a message to General Gage and said, you have a couple of options. You can leave the harbor quietly, or we're going to fire and destroy your navy. And so General Gage left Boston Harbor, and that's referred to as the liberation of Boston, and that's just 3 months before the Declaration of Independence is voted on, which is July of 1776. Let's see here. Once King George got word that independence had been declared, he ordered his navy to New York City. They were able to quickly move past all of the roadblocks, river blocks that the Continental Army had placed in New York. The Continental Army expected them to arrive in New York, but unfortunately for the Continental Army, the British found a back way in up Long Island, and the Battle of Long Island ensued. Several hundred patriots died, but George Washington and his men were able to sneak across the river in the fog of night and move across the Hudson and Neuse rivers and get out of New York before the British could capture them. So he escaped. That was August of 1776. So kind of ominous for George Washington. So now the British effectively have New York City. So the winter sets in, and Washington decides he's got to do something because his recruits' enrollment for the time to serve in the Army is quickly about to run out, the end of the month, December 31st, 1776. And so George Washington plans this surprise attack on Trenton, New Jersey. He crosses the river in the middle of the night, a cold, snowy night, marches up to Trenton and finds the German Hessian paid soldiers for the British in disarray from all of their partying the night before at Christmas, and George Washington captures almost 1,000 Hessians, take them as prisoners, and General Mercer, the British general in charge, is killed in the action. Big victory for George Washington. He goes on to win at the Battle of Princeton, which is very close to Trenton, New Jersey, a couple days later. He has a huge re-enrollment for recruits, and so his army is full up again. Unfortunately, his army is unable to prevent the British from capturing Philadelphia. Now, Philadelphia sits on the Delaware River. The Delaware River is wide enough for British warships, so just like what happened in New York happens in Philadelphia. Washington has learned he can't directly attack. As Torrey said, they sort of zigzag, and they attack, they retreat, they attack, they retreat, they stay in the woods, they stay in the country, and move into the cities to harass. And so they watch the fall of Philadelphia from a distance. Philadelphia falls in August of 1777. Meantime, just a couple months later, This is when General John Burgoyne and his army, a whole separate situation from what's happening in Philadelphia and New York, a whole different army. It's British, but a different regiment, are marching from Canada down towards New York City. And that's when the Battle of Saratoga takes place. This is a critical turning point in the war. Has nothing to do with George Washington, who is tasked with keeping an eye on Philadelphia. He's preoccupied with that, and so with the victory at Saratoga by American forces, the most important thing about this particular battle is that the French decide to acknowledge the new United States of America, and not only acknowledge them and give them political prowess, they also provide armament and weapons, and they also provide something that the American forces don't have, and that is a navy. The French had a pretty significant navy, and they're going to begin to harass British ships that are fighting in the Western Hemisphere. So Saratoga equals French. George Washington, in the meantime, has retreated to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, which is sort of a stone's throw from Philadelphia, and it's wintertime. Most of the troops don't fight during the wintertime, but poor George Washington is dealing with smallpox again amongst his men. His men are dropping like flies. They are undisciplined. Most of them have never fought before. He's very frustrated. He's very discouraged because the Continental Army is not providing, the Continental Congress is not providing them weapons or money or shoes or anything. And so some of it he's paying for out of his own pocket, but he's just super frustrated. He makes a decision to hire a gentleman by the name of Baron von Steuben. He is one of the names that I asked you to include on your list of terms. He was a Prussian officer who didn't speak a lick of English, but had a translator and would scream and yell, and he whipped those boys into a good military condition, and by the time spring came, they were in good shape. They were functioning as a well-trained army. He also looked at the camp and decided that there needed to be some things related to hygiene that needed to change, like moving the latrines away from food and that sort of thing. And then George Washington made the decision to have the army inoculated with smallpox, like what we watched on the John Adams video. And so the army gets inoculated. In fact, a handful of people still died from smallpox, but it helped them turn the corner. And by the time spring came, they were ready to go. Also, the Marquis de Lafayette came and stayed at the camp at Valley Forge. He was instrumental in helping George Washington harass the British, and we'll talk a little bit about him later. But I included some pictures of him. I mentioned this either Monday or last week, that he's a very important part of the American story. There's a reason he's included in the musical Hamilton. He was like a son to George Washington, and he believed in the cause of liberty and independence, and he hated the British. He was an aristocrat, a young aristocrat, but he had a lot of passion, and he loved George Washington and wanted to serve him in any capacity. And so there are many things in Washington, D.C. that are named after Lafayette. There's a picture here that shows a statue of Lafayette. And then inside the chambers of the House of Representatives, where the president gives the State of the Union address, you'll notice at your left, there's a tall painting of George Washington, and to your right of the flag, there is a painting of the Marquis de Lafayette within our Congress. The next picture is a picture of the White House with the statue of Andrew Jackson. That park, I think it's about a 9-acre park, is called Lafayette Square. It's named after Lafayette, and there's a statue of him around the corner. And then, I didn't put that there. I meant to include the picture of the key that he gave him from the Bastille, but it's not here. And then there's a picture that shows up at Crystal Bridges that I showed you guys in an email form when the Marquis de Lafayette is a little bit older. As I mentioned Monday or Friday or sometime last week, Fayetteville, Arkansas is actually named after Lafayette. Okay, the next slide says the Battle of Saratoga, October 1777. There's a picture of General John Burgoyne. Make sure you know he is the British general that surrendered. There's a map that sort of shows where this all took place. And this is when I jumped into the drive-through history video that reenacts much of the Battle of Saratoga a little bit differently than the America, the Story of Us did. But one of the things that comes out of that video, I wish you could see, but that's okay, is the importance of Benedict Arnold in this battle. Now, Benedict Arnold is an American general. I'm thinking he was from Virginia. He was a very good friend of George Washington's. I mean, a dear friend. And Washington depended on him in many ways. He helped Henry Knox get the cannons from Fort Ticonderoga. He went to Quebec and fought in Quebec. He fought at the Battle of Saratoga. In fact, he got shot, and he was disabled for about a year while his leg healed. He's probably the reason that the American forces won the Battle of Saratoga. We don't know why, but he turned coat. He decided to try to sell off West Point to the British, or hand off West Point to the British after Washington assigned him charge over West Point Fort. So we don't know what happened. Some have suggested that he hated Horatio Gates, the general that was in charge of Saratoga, and was bitter that Gates got all of the accolades for the victory when it was really his victory. He was kind of into himself, I guess you could say. He was arrogant, and he wasn't being praised enough. And so I don't know if they offered him money, esteem, position, but he took it. And so sadly, Benedict Arnold, hero, becomes Benedict Arnold the traitor, and later in the war fights as a British general against American forces, which is terribly sad. George Washington was devastated by this betrayal, and I'm hoping to share a story with you guys next week about that. Okay, again, the same timeline that you have, I had the kids note on their timeline where it says American victory at Saratoga, that this was a turning point in the war because the French joined forces with us. There's a PowerPoint slide that shows the addition of General John Burgoyne, General Horatio Gates, and General Benedict Arnold. So you make sure you know who each of those men are and the significance. Okay, so I had the kids do their writing prompt from pages 95 to 102. I only gave them one question. It's here on the slide. What I'd like for you to do on your daily assignment log is to answer this question in paragraph format. Just type in your answer. Under these circumstances or conditions, you can go ahead and use your book if you want to answer that. That's no problem, and then submit it to me. I handed out an additional timeline, which I'll give to you when you get back, that shows a larger version of Valley Forge and the three gentlemen that we mentioned. And then at this point, the war turns south. It turns to South Carolina. So we spent some time talking about that. And actually, we talked about it after everybody did the writing prompt. But make sure that you read those pages 95 to 102. Some of the things we talked about was, and we'll revisit this on, I guess, Wednesday. I won't see you guys again until Wednesday of next week. Actually, I'll revisit it with them tomorrow. I keep forgetting. So I'll have class with them tomorrow, and then I'll do another video for Friday's lesson. But Lord Cornwallis, General Lord Cornwallis, I guess is his title. He was an admiral. I think he was an admiral. I'll have to go back and look. He was in charge of British forces in the South, and he very swiftly and effectively captured Savannah, Georgia, and moved on into South Carolina and captured the largest city in the South, which was Charlestown, later becomes Charleston. It was a port city and about 12,000 people, and pretty effectively and quickly captured it, took a whole bunch, thousands of prisoners of war, lots of ammunition, and continued to move into North Carolina. The thought the British had was, they kind of gave up on New England with Burgoyne and the Sons of Liberty and Boston and all of that. They were like, this is hopeless. Who cares anyway, right? They're not big money making. There's not industry at this point yet. All of the money's in the South with tobacco and rice and indigo and all of that. So they decided to give up on New England and focus on conquering the South, and had a lot of success until the Swamp Fox and a few other backwoods militia groups got involved, and they began to pester the heck out of Lord Cornwallis, stealing his boats, cutting off his supply lines, killing his officers, just doing again that strike and retreat into the swamps. And Cornwallis was exasperated. There were several significant battles between I don't have his name in front of me. Tarrenton, I think is his name. He was a British officer who was brutal. There were rumors that he would, when he engaged the Americans and they surrendered, he would kill everybody who surrendered. And he created a monster because he became, I guess you could say not the stick man, the focus of anger. And so these militias that operated in the back country of South Carolina and North Carolina just continued to gain strength and pester the British to the point that Lord Cornwallis decided he needed to just back up, rethink things. And so he retreated to an island peninsula called Yorktown, Virginia. And which was a mistake because he effectively got surrounded. Once word started to spread to Washington's men in Pennsylvania, to the Green Mountain Boys in New England, and Marquis de Lafayette's men, and Alexander Hamilton at this point has been given a regiment. They heard Cornwallis has gone to Yorktown and he's stuck on a peninsula waiting for the British Navy to pick him up. The problem, of course, is that the British Navy is not coming because the French Navy have blockaded the Chesapeake Bay, and he doesn't fully understand that. And so we're going to have a showdown at Yorktown. And so that's sort of the nuts and bolts of it. Again, make sure you read 95 to 102, and we'll hit on some of the highlights tomorrow and then next week. I did show them a couple of clips from a movie called The Patriot. It's a pretty violent movie, so there's just a couple little things that I show. I did get permission to show, but that depict the movie in a way that I thought was important for the kids to see, and try to avoid some of the awfulness. And that is where we kind of stalled. We're going to pick up there. So we are going to have a map quiz on Friday of the 13 states. I'll probably send you the practice map and send your mom a copy of the map. And whenever you're ready to take that quiz, you can take it. It should be pretty simple. I just want to make sure everybody knows where the 13 states are. Sometimes I assume you guys know those things, but you don't. So geography is always important, especially when you're talking about military strategy. So that's where I'm going to end it today. I will upload this to Google Classroom, and today's my birthday, so I actually have a couple of things going on after school. I probably will not be on my email until maybe late tonight, more likely tomorrow. So hopefully I can get this uploaded and sent to you guys, and be ready to make sure that I get tomorrow's lesson recorded before the holiday weekend. So anyway, hope you guys are doing good, thinking about you, and I'll see you later. Bye.